I mean, start with water. Water's the most important thing. Here we are brewing to style. So if it's a beer indicative of a geographic location, we're gonna salt the water based on the kind of water that's in that location. So Burton-upon-Trent, Homa IPA, Marston's Brewing Company, right there, they have a specific style of water. Pilsner, specific style of water. So we will salt, and by salt I just mean we add, what we use here, we use 3 salts. We'll use sodium bicarbonate, which is baking soda, for our dark beers. We gotta raise the pH. If we're brewing basically everything else, we use gypsum and calcium chloride to adjust the pH of our water. We're looking for very specific characteristics in the pH in the water. But basically, we're throwing water in a set temperature based on the style of beer that we're brewing. Grain goes in with that water at the same time. Once it's all in there, it's gonna sit in there for an hour. During that hour, we're gonna let it rest. A little bit further into it, we're gonna pull from the bottom, put it on top, and use the grain as a giant filter bed. We're gonna clarify our wort, that's the liquid inside. After that 60-minute happens, we're gonna send it over to the kettle, where we'll boil it. We're gonna add sparge water, rinse the grain, get all that sugar, as much sugar as we can get. In the mash tun, where we start with that grain and water, that's all about starch. It's all about the endosperm that has been germinated and then killed off, kilned. We're converting starch to fermentable sugars in there. That's what that pH is all about. That's what that temperature is about. It's very specific. Water goes over, and then we're gonna boil it for 90 minutes. Water used to kill us back in the day, so that boiling is more about making it safe to drink. It's also where our bittering is gonna come out. So a lot of people think bittering when they're thinking about beer often. Hops, our first hops going in, it's gonna be called our bittering addition. Time goes by, comes out as bitterness in the beer. At the end of the boil, after what we do a 90-minute boil here. You throw hops in at that point, those are aroma hops. So volatile compounds in hops. The closest relative to the hop is marijuana, oils and resins. Same thing we're looking for in the hop is very similar to what they're looking for in that field. We don't want to boil them off. We want to keep them in the beer at that aroma point. We're going to knock it out, which we're just going to take it from 212 degrees boiling down to yeast pitching temperature. So 66 degrees here if we're doing an ale, 49 degrees here if we're doing a lager pilsner. Send it over to the fermenter. We'll pitch yeast during that process. We'll track the temperature, see what's going on. We want to ordered fermentation so it's nice and clean. After which point the yeast will terminate. That yeast is going to consume the sugar that we have sent over. Saccharomyces cerevisiae is going to eat that sugar. It's going to yield a molecule of CO2, which blows off of the bucket that we have, and it's also going to yield a molecule of ethanol. So every bubble in the bucket is a bubble of ethanol within the tank. So that's where alcohol is being formed. Beer is grain, wine is fruit. Distilled spirits are a concentration of those before that. So in order to make whiskey, you gotta make beer first. So we make beer, the yeast is gonna eat all that sugar. Once the yeast is done, we'll either harvest that yeast or we'll dispose of it, at which point we'll adjunct the beer, whether we're doing hops, coffee beans, vanilla beans, whatever it might be, fruit. We'll put that in there. When that's done, we're gonna crash it all down to get it nice and cold. That's gonna allow, with pressure in the tank, everything's gonna settle out to the bottom. Send it over to our conditioning tank where we will carb the beer. We force carb our beer here. A lot of places in the States do. It allows for us to hit numbers as far as consistency over batches of beer if we're making the same brand. 1516 Reinheitsgebot in Germany. The purity law says you can use water, grain, and hops. So they're missing CO2 and yeast in that. So today, if you're in Germany, they have said okay to yeast. That's a pretty important part. But CO2, you cannot force carb if you are brewing according to the Reinheitsgebot. We do not brew according to the Reinheitsgebot here in Skagway, Alaska. Depends on the type of beer that you're making. So again, lager pilsner, you're gonna have to add your primary fermentation time plus that lagering conditioning period. So those beers we literally brew December, January, February, and they're finished like basically when the season starts, when it begins. So you're looking at 4 months for those beers. IPA, we can do that in about 28 days. Simultaneously, we have, that is a great question, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 7 fermenters here, so we could be fermenting 7 different beers. But that's just in the fermenter and then going to those conditioning tanks. Then we have to start to get creative as we move beer around. But we do pretty well. We have a 5-barrel fermenter, 3 7-barrel fermenters, and 4 15-barrel fermenters. Here we run a 7-barrel brew house. A barrel is 31 US gallons. so right now in the season, we're running and gunning. When we get later into the year, what's considered the season, of course, our season's May through September. But when we start getting into August, September, October, beers we're brewing at that point, we're putting into bourbon barrels. And those will age over the winter, yes. So those beers will go in there, and then when we're here observing all that, and then we'll get excited and we'll start brewing lager pilsner beers. And then we'll wait, and then people will come back. One of the beautiful things about Skagway is the luck of the water. So this town of 1,000 has 2 breweries. You have the Klondike Brewing Company, you have the Skagway Brewing Company, you have Skagway Spirits, which does distilled spirits in this town, and you also have craft soda in this town as well, out of Alaska 360. So the luck of the water, Skagway scored a huge run with the water in this town. So any beer that we make that we don't get to use, unfortunately, we send down to Skagway Spirits and they concentrate it down, turn it into distilled spirits. So we have a lot of COVID beer that's sitting in barrels. It's aging right now. The water, it's just, it collects in the mountains, it falls its rain here, it's not being repurposed somewhere else and then being redistributed into the water system. Obviously, there's only so much water. But its first run from the sky after rain, basically, is we get to drink it. We get to brew beer with it. We get to proof spirits with it. We get to make soda with it. It's a beautiful thing in Skagway, the luck of the water. It's just a beautiful blank canvas for us to make beer with. That's the best part. So we can do basically anything to it. All we do is put it through a carbon filter here. Some places use reverse osmosis. Some people can't use the water where they are at all and truck it from somewhere else. We can just run it through a carbon filter just because it makes us feel better about it, and we bought one, and we use it. So I would say logistic-wise, we have the same challenges. It's always coming down to supply. It's always coming down to shipping channels. The only difference for us is that it just takes longer for shipping. So I would say the one additional piece that we have is that we have to make sure that stuff that gets on the barge makes it to Seattle by 5 p.m. on Tuesday if we want it the following week. So basically, it's the same. It is the same. We just have this one extra step that's a drawn-out step due to the barge service. So, I mean, I would say costs are definitely higher. We buy grain for X, and it's 2X landed in Skagway, so costs are without a doubt higher. Skagway, it's a luxury to work here, it's a luxury to live here, it's a luxury to visit, and as we all know with luxury, it costs a little bit more. Worth it, though. Starting January 1st, 2024, there's been some great things that happened. Title IV are the laws that regulate alcohol in the state of Alaska, and they've been trying to modernize those laws for the last 11 years. The Alaska Brewers Guild, Senator Machichi, a lot of people were involved in getting this to come together, and we're going to be allowed to have 4 live events a year. That's exciting. We get 1 more hour of operation. Instead of having to close at 8, we will get to close at 9. We would have loved to have got greater pour limits, but we also get to send kegs out, pony kegs, also known as a six-still, 5.167 gallons. Biggest thing for us though, and guests coming here, if you came here for the beer, you're staying for the service. If you came here for the service, you stayed for the beer. My yeast scream, huh? So beer is a beautiful thing, but you can screw it up really, really easily. From operator error, because you're convinced that you're jinxed every time you make this coconut brown ale, to just an actuator getting stuck on, whatever it might be. The tank wasn't as clean as it should be, and that only happens if we put it into a dirty tank on accident, which has never happened. But yeast needs a beautiful, perfect environment, just like anything and everyone, to thrive and survive. And so we did everything we could to prepare the vessel for the yeast to meet the wort and do this beautiful thing where it consumes sugar and creates beverage alcohol. And so what we do, the last drop of yeast that goes in, we give our yeast scream to ward off any of our jinxes. Excuse me. Yeah!